Most people, their contention with anarchism is security, the market for security. So essentially, you just have to realize economics, and the economics is that the nation state under democracies have a legal monopoly on the provision of security and justice. And what that results in is essentially less quantity supplied at a higher price. That's why it's so inefficient. It's not responsive to consumer demand. There's no contracts that people sign regarding what form of security will be provided and what are the responses to a failure to meet this contractual obligation. It doesn't exist. We just have the police. It's a monopoly. And in the same way that the police is provided by the state and the judicial system is provided by the state, then these entities are part of the same organization. What that means is that if you go to trial with a police officer, they're part of the same company. So who do you think is going to win, if you're taking to court one company and the people who run the court are also part of the same company? It's probably going to be the company. That's why cops have qualified immunity. Moreover, because they have this advantageous position, this qualified immunity, which means they're legally invulnerable to basically facing charges for what they do compared to what a citizen may do, the same actions, then that's why you have cops that can go on power trips and become more sadistic than they otherwise would be, because they hide behind the badge. Just following orders applies to the police as much as it did to the Nazis. And I think it's also interesting to note this whole culture behind back the blue. Okay, when you realize that the police work for the government and then the cops are just enforcing the laws of the government, then you're basically saying I support the government, which is contrary to most libertarians and probably even most conservatives, but I think the cognitive dissonance keeps them unable to really recognize this. Also, legality does not imply morality. Just because you have a law doesn't mean it should be enforced, let alone exist. And if you're a cop just following orders, then I think that's what makes the case that cops can be soulless. And if you support the cops in that regard, then I think you're also not thinking through what it is you may be supporting. So under anarchy, what you'd really have is a market for security. Think of it like overlapping circles where people would basically you'd have people that would pay for insurance and assurance agencies, and they would basically be facilitating security. As insurance companies operate for profit incentives, they want to protect their assets, minimize payouts, so they'll provide more security than perhaps the state would, because they want people protected to make more money. And so you keep people more safe. Moreover, all these insurance companies and security agencies already exist, but they're so heavily regulated that they're not allowed to come to their fruition of what the natural governing framework they really could potentially have if they were free to do so. So it comes back to a matter of freedom, to contractual proprietary arrangements. And moreover, because of the incentive structure of protecting assets, minimizing payouts, you'd have a harmonization towards more peace and more defensive predispositions. Insurance companies wouldn't be so aggressive because it's so costly to do that it has to be super justified. This actually applies to the theory of a just war. A just war is a war where the outcome is better and more beneficial and more peaceful than the existing arrangements prior to the war. But what we have today with the state and the militarized police is more offensive police and military. And it's just the whole bureaucracy of the Department the Department of War, the Department of Homeland Security, militarizing the police. The bureaucracy makes money by having more crime existing, by having more wars to go fight. So that's why we have, an empire that wants to continuously wage wars around the world, because it's an industrial complex where people make money off wars. And it applies to all forms of bureaucracy, including your local police. But I do think we can also have a better living arrangement if we cared more about who the local sheriff was and what laws they were going to enforce than like national elections, when really, it doesn't really matter. You always get John McCain, you always get the war party, even presidents who say no new wars, no new taxes. That's a good one. So I think, the market for security is super important to understand. And if you have this government status mindset, then you're oftentimes going to find this counterintuitive. Like, you think there needs to be a monopoly on the provision of security because that's what we've been living under the past, a couple hundred years or so. And that's what the history books say. But it's not true. It's just a market. It's a normal good. The more money you have, the more you'll buy. So, the market for security, super important to understanding anarcho-capitalism, anarchism, what a free, private law, proprietary, polycentric, contractual order looks like. So be free.